Hello, YouTube. I want to talk about the wonderful root of life again and add a little bit more information from the last video that I made some years ago. And I'm speaking about ginseng, ginseng in Russian. Ginseng in Japanese, Ningxi, is a Chinese perennial plant from the Aralaceae family. In total, up to 25 species are known in the genus Panax. But the most interesting is this root, which is considered by the Chinese to be all healing and even able to prolong human life. It can be located rarely at all and is hardly found in the wilds of forests and in the mountains of Manchuria, where it almost exclusively grows. The rights to breed and harvest ginseng in China have always belonged exclusively to the treasury. Roots are valued very expensive, more expensive than gold. It was known about the legendary root of life back in the 19th century. But since then, of course, a lot has changed. There are legends about this wonderful root. Here's one legend about ginseng. Its main character is a beautiful girl named Liao. She was in love with the brutal leader of the Hunhu's gang, Song Shi Ho. I can describe Hunhus as an irregular military formations and a product of the Chinese Han population of Manchuria. And in the official Russo-Sino rivalries in the territory, considered as bandits by many. When the beauty's brother Zhen Shen captured the scoundrel, Liao helped him free himself. Zhen Shen gave chase, overtook the fugitive, and engaged in a duel with him. The beloved beauty, who had been hiding in the bushes all this time, screamed loudly. Her brother looked back at the familiar voice, at this time Song Shi Ho, who had already received a mortal wound, gathered his strength and plunged his sword into the hero's back. The repentant Liao mourned day after day for her dead brother and her beloved. Her tears fell to the ground. Soon the first shoots of ginseng appeared from them. The healing properties of the root of life, or ginseng, have been known for more than 4,000 years. It still occupies a leading place in the Oriental medicine. Chinese doctors prescribed it as a remedy for many diseases. Old people believe that the root of life is able to restore their lost youth. The amazing quality of ginseng have been studied in various ways. In the 11th century, traditional tests were arranged in China. Two equally hardy people were offered to walk a certain distance, 3 to 5 kilometers. One of them had to hold a piece of the root of life in his mouth. If after the finish he looked cheerful and not too tired, experts concluded that the root is of high quality and has a healing effect. In the Tibetan medicine, ginseng is available only to the highest spiritual mentors, lamas, who are engaged in healing. Avicenna described this plant in great detail in his famous work, The Canon of Medical Science. Modern medical literature has more than 2,000 scientific papers related to the root of life. The popularity of ginseng has caused many tragic cases and caused many troubles to ordinary people. Crimes, murders, and even wars broke out for the sake of the healing root. In 1709, the Chinese ruler Kan He, by decree, established very strict rules for the search and collection of this plant. After receiving the imperial permission, the collectors went into the forest. At the edge of the forest, each of one of them was indicated the place of search and given a dry ration designed for a certain period. Upon the return of that's called the miners, ginseng miners, officials searched them, checking whether a valuable root was hidden in a secret place. Only after that the collectors were allowed into the Imperial palace. The collectors paid a tax for each root brought, receiving only a small reward in return. If any rule was violated, the roots were simply taken away without any payment. The collected ginseng was sorted by shape and size. The best roots became the property of the ruler. The emperor bestowed less valuable ones on court doctors and apothecaries. Even low grades were inaccessible to the common people. The search for the medicinal plant was carried out in the different places, mainly in the Ussuri region. The Ussuri Taiga, mixed forest of conifers and broadleaves, is a unique forest in northeastern Asia, which boasts extremely biodiverse forest ecosystems. The Ussuri Krai, or region in Russian, is an unofficial name for the part of the Primorsky Krai, maritime province, and the Khabarovsky Krai, that consisted of the Ussuri and South Ussuri okrugs, or districts. This name was often used in the late Russian Empire. The name comes from the fact that Ussuri River is located on the territory of the Krai. And by the way, you can see my video about the tigers of the Ussuri. Very interesting, and how they're being eliminated, basically. The Qing dynasty of China conceded its rights to the territory to Russia in the Amur annexation. From 1889 to 1918, the Ussuri Krai was the location of the Ussuri Kazakh host. It was re-established in the 1990s. But let's go back to ginseng. Every year, 30,000 people went to the Taiga. In one season, about 4,000 roots were dug out with a total weight of about 35 kilograms. Many ginseng hunters died from cold and lack of food, as well as from the claws of hungry predators. The clothes of the ginseng miners were simple. A long apron made of oiled cloth was worn on top to protect against the cold dew. A long, strong stick was used to rake leaves and grass. A wooden bracelet should have been put on the left hand. A tanned badger skin was tied behind, which allowed a tired person to sit down on wet moss or cold ground at any moment to rest a little. Already surveyed areas were marked by broken branches or tufts of grass torn from the ground. Fishing continued. That's what we can call it as. Continued from the end of May until the first autumn frosts. Having found the wonderful plant, the getter, the one that finds it, threw the stick far to the side, covered his face with his hands, and loudly informed that the plant he loudly informed the plant that he was an honest and open person, free from big and small sins. After performing the ritual, it was believed that now the ginseng would not harm the collector who saw it. The lucky collector carefully examined all the plants around the coveted bush, studied the soil, and many other features of the area. Only after that it was possible to start digging up the root. The miner, collector, carefully raked the dead leaves and grass with his hands, then carefully loosened the ground with a special bone stick. It was necessary to release not only the root itself, but numerous thin roots extending from it. According to ancient science, the shape of the root is of great importance. This also impacted the price. The excavated root was placed in a special box made of tree bark, inside of which there was moist moss. By the way, modern Russian researchers did the same thing when they dug up the ginseng they found, at least some of them. Most often, 3 to 4 leaves could be seen on the stem of ginseng, less often 5 or 6. The dream of every collector was to find a plant with 7 leaves. The precautions accompanying the search for the root of life were not superfluous. The fact is that this plant has one unusual feature. Its thin stem has an increased sensitivity to mechanic irritations. If the stem is damaged, the root falls into a long hibernation, goes deep into the ground, and remains in the soil for more than a decade. And then, when favorable conditions occur, it germinates as if nothing had happened. In Europe, ginseng has been treated with distrust for a long time. Dutch merchants were the first to pay attention to the miraculous plant. At the beginning of the 17th century, they tried to establish its sale, but they did not receive the expected profit. The main reason for the failure was an extremely superficial idea of how to use the root. Valuable medicinal raw materials were recognized as ineffective and at the same time too expensive. In Russia, the root of life was appreciated even under the Tsar or King Alexei Mikhailovich. The boyar or aristocrats Spafari, being in China as part of the Russian embassy, studied in detail the rules for handling ginseng and, returning to his native land, published a detailed description of it. Since then, the new medicine has become very popular among the wealthy Russians and at the court. Later, a close relative of ginseng, Garant Ogen, human food, was discovered in Canada and other areas of North America. Thousands of collectors, let's call it that, rushed to the American forest for the healing root. Uncontrolled extraction of the plant in huge quantities, more than 200 tons per year, has led to almost complete disappearance of the species. In ancient China, pan tsui, ginseng, was valued at its weight in gold. The collection of wild ginseng was increasingly expanding. Its reserves in the forests of northern China and North Korea were gradually depleted, and the surge moved to the basins of the Ussuri River and the forests of Manchuria. In the late 19th and early 20th century, according to Arseniev, the search for ginseng in the Russian coastal Taiga was carried out mainly by the Chinese. Vladimir Klavdievich Arseniev, who passed away in September of 1930, was an explorer of the Far East of the Russian Empire and later in the Soviet Union, who recounted his travels in a series of books, по Уссурийскому краю, along the Ussuri land in 1921, and Dersu Uzala in 1923, telling of his military journeys to the Ussuri basin with Dersu Uzala, a native hunter, from 1902 to 1907. In 1908, Dersu Uzala was murdered by bandits. Arseniev was the first to discover numerous species of Siberian flora and the lifestyles of native ethnic people. He was persecuted by communists after they usurped control over the former Russian Empire. But of course, later he was, as they say, rehabilitated, and his books became available. Even stamps in his honor were produced. I often refer to him in my research of various paranormal aspects of the Russian Far East. My mother taught me to love his books. My father had served in the Soviet armed forces in the Far East and some of the lands described by Arseniev. I remember his stories too. Now, back to ginseng. There was a profession of ginseng seekers, kornevщики in Russian, or root ginsengers, who passed their experience from generation to generation. And from 1907 to 1910, Russian seekers, or kornevщики, began to search for ginseng together with the Chinese root growers. Their number increased markedly in the 1930s. In the 1940s, 1950s, 500 to 600 root growers or seekers conducted searches for ginseng in the Primorsky Krai, maritime province. And they annually handed over 10 to 15,000 roots under the contracts of the Consumer Union. In a year, they extracted more than 130 kilograms of fresh ginseng roots. 60% of this amount accounted for the Chuguyevsky, Kalininsky, and Yakovlevsky districts of the region. The average weight of one root was 23 grams. According to the external signs of the root, ginseng seekers, kornevщики, learned to determine its age. The Chinese kornevщики gave ginseng, depending on the number of leaves, special names. A plant with 3 leaves was called tantaza, with 4 leaves siple, with 5 uple, and finally rarely found with 6 leaf liple. Lined up in one line, with small intervals, modern kornevщики zigzag and slowly walk through the taiga, raking the grass with their staffs. Every 50 steps, those coming from the edge break branches, marking the boundaries of the itinerary. From the outside, these searchers are similar to the cautious actions of sappers who grope mines hidden underground. As soon as one of the root growers sees bright red ginseng berries, slightly flattened on the top among the greenery, a loud cry is heard, "Pan tsui!" Russian writer Prishvin describes his first encounter with ginseng in the taiga as follows. Luan, the ginseng seeker, opened the grass and I saw it. There were several leaves that looked like human palms with 5 outstretched fingers on a low and thin stem. For such a delicate plant, not only the izubr with its rough hoof was dangerous, but even an ant, if it needed something, could stop this life for many more years in a short time. How many accidents threatened this plant? Izubr, for those who do not know, is also known as Manchurian wapti, a magnificent animal. According to the tradition established since ancient times, ginseng is dug out in the evening at sunset so that the root is less time in the light and dry. The soil is carefully excavated at a distance of 1 meter from the root with a bone stick. Then the root is carefully removed, but so as not to damage any, even a tiny root. Otherwise, the receiver, the buyer, will lower the price for it. The stem is broken off from the neck. The root is carefully placed in an envelope made of a piece of cedar bark, covered with wet moss. Putting the root there, sprinkle a few handfuls of earth in which ginseng grew. The kornevщик is obliged to seal the ginseng seeds immediately into the soil and put a conditional signs next to the tree. In the old days, the kornevщики of Wa Pansui developed their own Taiga language, which was called Hao Shu Hoa. These were conventional signs on trees and marks on bushes. The Taiga language has been preserved for decades. Then the signs were usually fumigated with smoke. Such a burnout meant that the root seeker came here to a growing, not yet ripe root, and another seeker should not touch his find. But unfortunately, many of the Wapan Sui in the old days were attacked by robbers, Hunhus, who took the Taiga wealth from them and paid the seekers with their blood. The Karnevshiki were usually not armed, since it has long been believed that only a pure, unblemished person with good intentions can find the miracle of the world for which he went into the remote Taiga. Otherwise, they believed the ginseng would go into the ground and not appear to a person. I've heard many legends, many stories, let's put it that way, and this is true. Ginseng seekers believed that the Pansui was under the protection of the forest spirit embodied in the tiger. Arseniev wrote that one should be surprised at the endurance and patience of the Chinese in rags, half-starved and exhausted. They go without any roads. All the time they are breaking bushes or putting moss and dry grass on the branches of trees. These are conditional signs so that another person does not follow this trail, because this place has been inspected and there is nothing to do here. How many of them died of hunger? How many got lost and went missing? How many were torn to pieces by wild animals? Having discovered the root, Wapan Sui first of all performed a prayer, assuring that he came to the root with an open heart and good intentions, and only after that, with great care, he began to dig it out, which usually lasted several hours. The age of the root was determined by an experienced seeker, not only by the scars on the neck, but also by the brown rings on the body of the root. The Karnevshik cleaned the soil stuck to the root with a silk thread. The above-ground parts, the stem and leaves, were burned at the stake. Simply throwing them away was considered disrespectful of the sacred plant. To the great Lord, the spirit of the mountains, the invisible deity of nature, who gave him this wealth, thank Wapan Sui. He did not forget to leave conventional signs on the trunks of cedar trees. Root seekers who could come here someday should know that a pansui was found here at one time. Its offspring may grow somewhere nearby, so you should be more careful. Under favorable conditions, self-seeding of ginseng seeds can create a whole colony of plants of different ages. Such families consist most often of 3 to 5 plants. There was a report of the discovery of 52 ginseng roots in one habitat. According to the Karnevshiki, there are families of 100 roots in the Taiga. It is known that Arseniev's guide, or Gold, as they were called, Dirsur Zala, once gave him a family of 22 roots transplanted by him in the early 1890s to a remote Taiga place in the upper reaches of the Lefu River. Arseniev outlined the location and all the signs on the map from his words and made notes in his notebook, but he didn't find time to go for this wealth. The notebook was lost. Arseniev's colleague, Dirsu Uzala, died, and the scientist himself was gone too in 1930. The unique colony of Dirsu Uzala could have grown very much over the past over 100 years, and still many people want to find this unusual Taiga treasure. Let me tell you one more legend about ginseng. A long time ago, a healer named Luo Haoshi lived on the riverbank. He was kind-hearted and perfectly mastered the art of healing. So he treated everyone with compassion and was always ready to help. One day, a terrible pestilence swept the whole neighborhood. The doctor worked tirelessly, forgetting about sleep and food. The news of his virtuous deeds reached the very heavens. Soon the Jade Lord himself found out about Lu Haoshi's kindness. He marveled at the sincerity and dedication of this man, so he ordered the immortal Lu Dongbin to descend into the human world and help Lu Haoshi save the sick from a terrible disaster. One morning, when Lu Haoshi was about to start breakfast, a strange old man dressed in rags came to him. He bowed and asked to cure a man suffering from fever. The healer immediately put down his meal and hurried after the stranger. They came to a remote thicket of the forest, to a small hut under a thatched roof. The old man lit a fire, put a pot on it, and said, "You rest, eat, and then get to work, and I will go to the forest for firewood." Luo Haoshi waited for the elder for a long time. The water in the boiler was just boiling. The room was filled with a fragrant aroma. To prevent the decoction from escaping, the doctor lifted the lid and immediately was stunned with horror. A little man was swimming in the clear water. Luo Haoshi touched him with his finger. Indeed, a man, unable to remember himself from fear. The doctor returned home. In a dream, he saw a gray-haired old man. He said, "Haoshi, your kindness has not left indifferent neither heaven nor earth. The Jade Lord himself ordered me to help you. In the pot, you saw the root of Ginseng, which is more than 5,000 years old. He only looks like a human. With the help of this drug, you will be able to rid people of terrible disease." Lu Haoshi cured many, and he himself lived for more than 120 years. Such are the tales of Ginseng, and I will bring you more about the Far East, the Ussuri Taiga, and some of the incredible things that can be found there. Fascinating. And if you like my research, please help me. You can support me. You'll find the links in the description to this channel. Please stay tuned for more videos about Eurasia and other parts of the world. Thank you for your attention to my work. Please subscribe to my channel. Please like my videos.